Right, so in today's video, this is the laptop that we repaired in the last one. I'm not sure how well you can see because I've got the camera on such an awkward angle. But technically this is the laptop that we repaired or upgraded in the last video. So what I'm going to do now is basically show you an information screen that is in all machines. They have different ways of getting into what's called the BIOS. When you press power on this particular machine, I know it's F2. So if I keep pressing the F2 key, it's going to take me into the BIOS. Now if that's locked out with a password and you don't know it, you've basically had it. But I knew that this one wasn't locked out before I purchased it. So this is what you're presented with on most machines. You have the information screen basically, which tells you what type of processor you've got in there. In this particular instance, it's a Core i5 CPU, Central Processing Unit, that's the brain, running at 2.67 gigahertz. It's now detected the hard disk that we put in there, and it can see that it's a SATA 3 240 gigabyte SSD solid state drive. Tells me the serial number of the drive. It's looking for the DVD writer, which I haven't put back in yet, but it will show that as well. Tells you the version of the BIOS, the manufacturer, etc., and the serial number on the motherboard. A lot of that is insignificant unless you want to see whether your machine is actually detecting the hard disk and detecting your CD-ROM, but it's just a brief overview. Using the arrow keys we can move across and into the main section here. We can set the time and date if that happens to be wrong, and it is. So this one hasn't caught up with the time. So we just go back again and change that to 20, and it's actually, sorry, 20, tab or arrow, enter, 07, and that's as near as damn it. It is the 5th of the 12th 2022. It tells us in here how much memory we've got and how much video memory we've got allocated. That's dedicated memory, but you can allow the video card to use more of your internal memory on some machines. So as you can see, it's greyed out and doesn't let us do a change on there. So we want quiet boot enabled more often than not. Network boot, we don't need that enabled because we're not going to be booting from the network. You may want to do that, and that's how you do it. But I'm going to disable that because it's an extra step the machine has to think about, doesn't need to do. F12 boot, I do want that because if you press F12, it can give me several options. Do I want to boot from a USB, a CD-ROM, a DVD writer, a USB stick, etc. So we want that enabled so that if I press F12 on startup and I put a USB stick in it, it will give me the option to boot from it. The D2D, you can usually disable this, but if it's a new machine, sometimes they come with a recovery console and you can leave that enabled, but we don't have one on this, so we'll disable it. Mode that we want for the disk. Now I happen to know that my Windows 10 installer, I've got it set to legacy mode. So I'm going to change it over to IDE mode. The AHCI is better for more modern systems. However, because I'm working with the tools I have, I'm changing that to IDE. Security, this is where you can put a password in and lock this machine down so nobody can get back in here. I wouldn't recommend you do it unless you really have a need to. You can even put a hard disk drive password, so you can have the password for the BIOS and you can have a password on the hard disk. But if you forget them, the problem with that is you can't get back into it either, and the hard disk is pretty much useless. Password on boot, you would enable that if you enable those. We usually leave those empty. and this is the boot order. So you can see the first device would be the CD-ROM, which we haven't put back yet. Then it tells me the second device to look at is the internal hard disk. But I want to be able to boot from a USB hard disk drive, and it tells you how to change the values here. So F5 and F6 should move that up. So now I've got CD-ROM, but I haven't put that back in yet, so what I'm going to do is move it right to the top. No, wrong one. I'm going to move the USB hard disk as the first bootable device, then it'll look for the CD-ROM, then it'll go to the hard disk, and you have several other options. We put the network boot at the bottom because one, we've disabled it, and two, it'll be the last device to be looked at. It'll have booted before then. So now we've made those changes, we want to exit saving those changes. And then we will insert our Windows 10 installer disk. Hopefully this will work. So we'll put our, helps if it find the right slot, doesn't it? There we go. We'll put the USB stick in there, we'll exit and save changes, say yes, and technically it should look at that device as the first boot device, hopefully. You can see the drive is now flashing away, and something is happening in the machine. It's basically reading this disk, and what we're going to do now is an install of brand new clean install of Windows 10. We'll show you how to make these. These are downloadable, and you can create these on USB sticks with a little tool which I'll show you in another tutorial. But for now I just want to show you us getting this machine, it was in 1,000,000 bits, up and running with a Windows 10 on it. So I know on the bottom of this machine there is a license for Windows 7 Professional. And I know I can use that license to activate Windows 10 and Windows 11. We're going to show you how we do that. So what we do is we select obviously your language and your keyboard layout. Then we click next. Then we click install. Now we know that drive in there, it may have data on it or whatever. It's actually one I've had in another machine, but it's almost new, the drive, and I'm just going to clean it down and then I'm going to reinstall Windows on this machine. So what you do is, it's asking now for your product key. You could put it in at this point, or we can just move on and say I don't have a product key, and this part is where it becomes important. You need to know what you do have a product key for. In this case it's the Pro version of Windows 7, so I need to select the Windows 10 Pro so that the licenses will correspond. Then we click next. Another thing is, if this motherboard has ever had Windows 10 on before, it will just digitally activate when it recognises the serial number, etc., without me having to do any further intervention. So you'll notice I'm not connected to the internet at this point, and I'm going to explain why I'm not connected to the internet for my personal reasons. So we click accept the license agreement and then we move on. Now we're going to do custom install of Windows because I'm doing a fresh install. So I want to control how this does. Now I've got two partitions here which I've already previously done at some point, and I've labelled one Windows 11 and the other one's just drive 0. So what I'm going to do is put drive Windows 10 on this partition, and then we'll put Windows 11 on that one. So we'll select the partition where we want Windows 10, we'll click format, say OK. That means it clears the partition off and there's no data on there. It only takes a few seconds this. There we go. And now, making sure you're still selected on partition 1, we'll click next and it will start the installation. So you can see now, basically We're at about 94%. We're just letting it do its thing here. And we'll go through the full process installation, see how it's done for people who don't know how to do this. As I say, these tips are aimed at novices or people who want to do home repairs that, or maybe want to upgrade the machine, put in an SSD, make the drive faster. That's a simple process, but I've done a more complex one prior to this video. You'll see it just starts to finish off. And it says it's going to reboot in 10 seconds. We'll let it do it, or you can click the restart now. We'll let it do it itself. But what we'll notice this time is the machine will reboot. We told it to look at this USB stick first as the first boot device, but it asked me if I want to boot from there to press a key. If I don't press any key, it'll look. There we go. Press any key to boot from this USB, but I don't want to. It waits a period of time, then continues with the installation, now from the hard disk. Sorry about the glare off the light as well. I'm in a sort of dark room with very poor light, and I'm going to get a better lighting system for this. So it wants to connect me to the network. So I'm going to tell it down in this bottom corner that I don't have internet. Then now I've only got an option to continue with limited settings. So I want to continue with limited settings. I don't want all that other rubbish. Now I'm going to create an account. I'm just calling it Acer. And for simplicity, so I can finish setting off, I'm not going to put a password in. I'm just going to click next and next. Now I've got an administrator's account on there called Acer, and I can now say not now, I'm not interested, and in a moment I'll have a desktop and with an administrator's account local on this machine, so I can then manage it from there on. And as you can see, we're almost there, and then we have a desktop. Looking for drivers, so there's some drivers it hasn't managed to pick up, but we'll show you how we do that. So for now, we'll say maybe later, and now I have Windows 10 installed on this machine. I can now remove the USB stick by clicking on that and eject the disk. It's safe to remove. It turns the light off, and I can move that without damaging it. And there we have Windows 10 installed on a laptop. Now what I'll do is I will connect up to the internet to see if I can just activate this with a digital license. So what we'll do is we'll type in activate activation settings, and if we go and look, we'll probably find it's not activated, and it says it's unable to reach the Windows activation server. So we'll leave that like that, and we will now connect and see if it will automatically activate. If it doesn't, we can use the Windows 10 key off the bottom on the license of this machine. So I'm just going to connect up to the Wi-Fi for now. I'm going to say no, I don't want other machines to be discover this. We'll say no. We'll get a connection. It's connected. We'll go down here. And the first thing that should happen is we should get an activation pretty quickly if it's going to activate. Go back to Windows Update, and now we'll find activation, and there you can see Windows is activated with a digital license. So this motherboard has had a Windows 10 installed on it previously. The activation server recognised the serial number from this motherboard and thought this has had Windows 10 Pro in the past, and automatically assigned a digital license to this machine. So now we have a Windows 10 Pro license, we can install Windows 11 Pro and activate that also. So before it does anything else, we'll do that. So I'll now disconnect from the Wi-Fi again, because I don't want to have the same scenario and I want the same accounts with Windows 11. So what we do this time is I'll shut down the machine, and we told the machine that we want the USB stick to be the first boot device. So we'll now put in Windows 11 installer. So F12 we know is our boot devices. See if it gives us the option. Well, there's the USB hard disk drive, which is what we want to boot from. So it should boot now when I tell it to do that. If not, it's because of the drive. There we go, press any key. And now you can see we're getting this option to boot from the USB. And it's slightly different from the last logo. And this is Windows 11. If you remember, we created two partitions on the hard disk drive internally, one for Windows 10 and a separate partition, but they're all one physical drive split into two, so we can put Windows 11 on as well, and we can have the machine dual boot, and we can select whether we want to use Windows 10 or Windows 11. So we select that up according to the language that you require and click next. Click install. Very similar process to the Windows 10 install, but you'll see there's differences when the installation is finished. But the process is basically the same. We say we don't have a product key. We know it's Windows 10 Pro, so we'll select 11 Pro. We click next. Then we accept the agreement and click next. We do a customized install. It's given me the option to just upgrade the Windows 10. I don't want to do that. I want to customize it. That's the Windows 10 partition. I want this to go on the Windows 11 partition that I created. I want to format it. Make sure it's clean. Only takes a few seconds. There we go. And now I want it to install on this secondary partition. You'll see it's removed the Win 11, but that was just to identify to get in. I now know I'm on partition 2, and that's where I want it. I click next, and we'll go through the same process of the installation. Right, so we've basically run right the way through this time, and we're back to this, slightly different, and again it wants me to connect to the internet. So we're just going to say we don't have it down here. It just speeds the installation up. We want to continue with limited setup. Give it a name for the account. Next. Just next. We don't want a password on it yet. And go through the same process. We can connect to the internet and it should activate. And that's Windows 11 start screen. So we've now got it set up the way we want with our account on, so we can manage it accordingly. What we're going to do is just come out of that. We'll check the activation settings. Activation settings. It says it can't connect again. So now we'll connect to the internet. That's me turning off the Wi-Fi instead of on. Let's see what we've got. We'll find our Wi-Fi. Click connect. We get connected. We'll come out of that, go into something different. And then back to the system. Look at the activation status. And now you'll see it's active. And it has a tick in. Click this little arrow and it tells us that Windows is activated with a digital license, and I didn't have a key for this machine, but because that motherboard has previously had a Windows 10 installation on there, and I got lucky it was the Pro version, I always had the fallback of the key, the license key, on the underside of this machine. If it hadn't worked, we could have popped that in and it would have activated. And there we have it, Windows 10 and Windows 11 on the same machine. That's finding a driver for the display, and that's why we got the flash on the screen. That was just it finding a driver, and I can see it's installing it. We'll now do the same thing and eject the USB. Light goes out. Then we can safely remove the install media. Windows 10 and Windows 11. So what should happen now is when we restart this machine, we should get an option which operating system we want to use. So we'll restart the machine, and then we should get presented on the next reboot. Do I want to use Windows 10 or do I want to start it with Windows 11? So that was Windows 11, and just to prove it, we'll go back to Windows 10 when we get presented with the options. There's the options. So we'll click on Windows 10. The machine will restart, and this time it will boot into Windows 10. And there's Windows 10. So we've got Windows 10 and Windows 11 both on the same machine. If I open File Explorer, we can see that with this drive, it looks like 2 disk drives, but it's actually only one disk drive of 250 gig, split almost in half. That's our Windows 11 install, and that's our Windows 10 install. We've got 100 gigabytes free. The grey area is the free space. The blue area is what's already taken up. And on this one we've got 101 gigabytes free, so 1 more gigabyte, sorry, a little less, 19 gigabytes less than this one, but we didn't split the drive exactly in half. But there's still ample space to store anything from Windows 10 or Windows 11, or of course you can just put external USBs in, save to those, connect a NAS network storage drive. There's many options. And that's how to install Windows 10 and Windows 11 on from a fresh install, clean install, if your drive was to fail and you had to replace it. I hope you've enjoyed this little tutorial. Let me know what you think in the comments below. For now, please stay safe, be practical, keep yourselves out of harm's way. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.